repeat there, sorry. And this was in those early days back in 2012 when he got that job. So when that kind of worked out and another job opened up, we thought we maybe might try it again. And we asked Pete, Pete, do you know anybody else that's homeless that might want a job? And he said, well, my brother Joe, he's also homeless, also selling the big issue. So we said okay, and we gave his brother Joe a job, and Joe was working hard, and another job opened up, and we thought we'll try it again. And we said, do you know anybody else, guys? And they said, well, there's a guy down the street called John. He sells the big issue. He might be okay. So we gave John a job. And then at this point, I think it kind of dawned on them all that we were basically sort of soft touches as employers, and they might have one or two other friends that they could put forward. And they recommended somebody called Colin. So that's kind of how it all got started, really. We were in this little cafe and we started to offer a handful of jobs to people in a situation of homelessness. And as we got a little bit more immersed in the issue, we decided to introduce a pay it forward concept. And we started to encourage our customers to kind of maybe they might want to buy something extra. So customers started to buy extra coffees and sandwiches, and we started to invite homeless people in. And again, almost before we'd even realized it, we were feeding 40 to 50 people every day in this little cafe. So that kind of became the whole origins and the whole ethos of Social Bite, and we decided to create a social, format it as a social enterprise kind of business model, that would ultimately have an objective of trying to support homeless people through offering food and employment, and that would kind of then became the whole direction of travel. So as I kind of tell each anecdote through my story, I'm going to try and draw out a different lesson. Um, Hopefully, there we go. Can you see that screen okay? That changed by now. Yeah, so you can
Yeah.
hopefully see different lesson from each kind of moment in my story. So yeah, basically this one is go with the flow and be prepared to pivot. If we'd been too set in our original business plan, then we would have never embarked on the journey that we ended up going on. And it was ultimately only because someone came and knocked on our door, and we were just open enough to being flexible and exploring these new kind of opportunities as they came that we ended up going on the direction that we did. So from there, we decided to try and open a bit of a chain of cafes. We thought, let's try and give Starbucks a bit of a run for their money here in Scotland, and we just started to try and open more cafes. So we ended up managing to open 5 cafes, two in Edinburgh, two in Glasgow, and one in Aberdeen. And by this point, we were employing quite a lot of people. We made it a policy that around a quarter of the workforce would be people that have struggled with homelessness. And we were giving out quite a vast quantity of free food across these cafes. But pretty much nobody out with the immediate locations of the shops and the customer base would have ever really heard about Social Bite or known anything about what we did. But we got a bit of a crazy, somewhat surreal profile boost in 2015 when, as crazy as it sounds, I decided to write a letter to George Clooney, as you do, and invited George Clooney to come to Edinburgh and come and visit our little cafe. And amazingly, in November 2015, he showed up. And as you might imagine, he brought the city of Edinburgh to a bit of a screeching standstill. It seemed like there were sort of cars swerving off the road to get sight of him. At the cafe, about 200 women arrived about 6 in the morning and started camping out just to kind of catch a glimpse of him. By the time he actually arrived about 2 o'clock that afternoon, the scene outside the cafe, it was like that scene from the movie Notting Hill, where the guy opens his door and it's just sort of wall to wall paparazzi and the news trucks and kind of absolute madness. And I remember I went into the newsagent the next day, and Social Bite was on the front page of every single national newspaper across the United Kingdom. And I had cousins that live in South Africa that were phoning me up saying, we've just seen you on the South African news with George Clooney. And it was literally ended up being one of the main news items on the BBC News at 6. It was sort of like, bong, George Clooney visits this cafe. And when I look back on that now, I could think, it really must have been a bit of a slow news day in hindsight, because all the story really was George Clooney eats a sandwich. But for our tiny little charity, our tiny little social enterprise, it suddenly gave us this big profile that we thought we might be able to build on. So the lesson that I'll draw out from that experience is if you don't ask, you don't get. And even sometimes when something might feel a bit far fetched and speculative, You just don't know unless you put yourself out there what could happen. And we thought we might really put that theory to the test. And about a year later, I decided to write another pretty speculative letter off, this time to Leonardo DiCaprio. And almost 12 months to the day after George Clooney arrived in Edinburgh, Leo did as well, and came and had lunch in one of our restaurants that we'd opened by this point. So this was in 2016, and the people you can see in the photo here with him are all people that have come from a background of homelessness, and they were involved in the day and preparing his lunch. And the girl next to him, there was a girl called Biffy, and I remember the next day she was on the front page of one of the newspapers, and the headline was, "I used to feel invisible, and now I got to cook lunch for Leonardo DiCaprio." So these kind of big sort of A-list celebrity visits weren't only drawing attention to our organisation, but it was actually also giving people that have often felt totally invisible in society, giving them a really loud voice to be important spokespeople around the issue of homelessness. So yeah, so as I said, our tiny little organisation suddenly had a big profile, at least locally in Scotland, and we were thinking about how we might try and build on that, how we might try and develop some more ambitious fundraising activities, some more ambitious projects and programs, some more ambitious kind of political campaigning on the homelessness issue. And we kind of felt that in society, you we get so desensitized to an issue like homelessness. We all walk past people sleeping rough and begging in doorways, in any major city in the UK, and you start to just take it as a fact of life. You take it for granted and just kind of accept it. And we felt like that shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't just accept homelessness as a fact of life, and maybe we could try and raise our voice and create a campaign that would call for a society where nobody should have to be homeless. We thought about how we might try and create this campaign, and we decided to put on a big mass participation sleep out. So we decided to book out Princes Street Gardens in the city centre of Edinburgh, and we wanted to try and invite people from all walks of life to come and sleep out on what would be a cold Scottish winter's night. And we started to write off to employers and businesses and ask them to sign up the chief executives and the employees. And we wrote to the universities and asked the students to get involved, and the high schools and the churches and the mosques. And we ended up with 8,000 people signing up to sleep out on this particular night. You can see everyone packed in side by side in Princes Street Gardens. It was a phenomenal sight. And as fate or God or whatever you believe in would have had it, um, that particular night of the year turned out to be the coldest night of the year. Temperatures dropped to -8 degrees Celsius. Everyone, myself included, shivered through the night and woke up with our sleeping bags covered in frost. And we gave each person a fundraising page, and we asked them to raise money for taking part. And as those temperatures plummeted, the funds poured in, and those 8,000 people ended up raising £4 million on that one night, which was a really staggering sum to raise. And it really also, equally importantly, as the money raised, did shine the national political spotlight on this issue. 8,000 people weren't just signing a petition, but they were actually braving a winter's night to stand in solidarity with people that have to do that every night. And that was a real kind of mandate for political action on the issue as well. So the lesson I was keen to draw out from that is that we all have the power to sort of manifest the world that we want to create. And all of these things that were coming to life, they all started just as an idea at some point. And when I was stood in that Princes Street Garden surrounded by 8,000 people that all bought into that idea, it really gave me a lot of conviction that we all have the power to bring our ideas to life and to manifest the world that we want to try and create. So from there, we decided to try and build on these sleepouts, and we staged in 2018 a big multi-city sleepout in 4 cities in Scotland. And then when we got into 2019, um, for some bizarre reason, I kind of started to think, I wonder whether we could take this sleep out concept and on a one-off basis, maybe we could stage a big global campaign. I remember when I was about 14, my little brother won tickets in the newspaper to go to Bob Geldof's Live 8 concert. We went down to Hyde Park and went to Live 8, and I thought maybe we could create our own sort of Live Aid moment for the homelessness issue. And we decided to come up with this campaign that we would call the world's big sleep out. And the aspiration was to try and stage events in 50 cities all over the world, um, with a target of 50,000 people sleeping out all over the world on the same night. So we started to think, how on earth do we go about this? It was a pretty big jump in ambition. Um, and I had a pretty good network in Scotland by this point, but didn't know too many people in London and knew absolutely nobody in New York at all. So I remember I was sat in my little flat in Edinburgh one night and I decided to get started. And I Googled New York City parks and I found a number for the New York City Parks Department. So I phoned them up and sort of cold called them and pitched them the idea and said, my name's Josh. We've been doing these sleepouts in Edinburgh. We'd like to try and get a venue in New York. How would we go about applying for a permit? And the guy sort of cut me off and said, look, I'll stop you there. He said, that'll be completely impossible to do that in New York. He said, there's time curfews here. Um, Events have to be finished by midnight. The NYPD never like to set new precedents. They said it's just not going to happen. You would really need to get the mayor involved, if you wanted to do something. He goes, honestly, you should just try a different city. So I felt a bit deflated, like the dream was kind of a bit over before it had really begun. But I'd kind of learned over the years not to take it no for an answer, at least not straight away. So I decided to book a little trip to New York, and I booked to go out there for 3 days. And I thought I'll try and set up meetings if I can, and try and make something happen in person. So I discovered this network, which is a Scottish enterprise related thing called the Global Scots Network, which is basically people that live all over the world who have some kind of affinity to Scotland. Most of the time, it's like they're great grand Scottish or something, but they feel very connected to Scotland. And I asked them to set me up different meetings. So I ended up booking about 8 meetings with these global Scots and in New York, and I went out there for 3 days. And most of the meetings were pretty pointless, and speculative. But I ended up meeting this one guy called Itai Gross, and he said, "Oh, I can't really help you, but maybe you could meet my friend Bruce. He's pretty well connected." So the next day, I go into this big skyscraper and meet this guy Bruce, and I didn't know what Bruce did or what his background was, but I was pitching the idea. And he was turned out to be a pretty energetic, quite aggressive New Yorker, and every second word was fuck basically. So as I was pitching the idea, he literally looked at his watch and went, "Josh, fucking get on with it, Josh." So I was got a bit flustered, and I decided to show him a video of the event from Edinburgh. And as I was showing him this, he sort of smile came across his face and he goes, "Josh, this is fucking great. I love this idea, Josh." And he basically said, "I'm going to phone someone in City Hall right now." So he picks out his phone in the meeting and he goes, "Look, you got to give this guy 10 minutes tomorrow about this homeless thing." So he goes, "Right, tomorrow you've got a meeting in City Hall." So the next day I go into City Hall, um, and I end up meeting 3 people from the mayor's office. And I'm due to fly home that day, so I arrive with all my luggage and a bit flustered. And again, I pitched them the idea, show them this video, and then they start to say, "Yeah, it would be pretty difficult to do this in New York, but I don't know, maybe a venue that might work could be Times Square. Would that be a possibility?" So really, so ended up jumping on that. We had follow-up trips, follow-up meetings with the NYPD, with the Times Square Alliance, and to my amazement, we were given permission to close down the entirety of Times Square, for this sleep out. And from there, we approached Sadiq Khan's office in London, and they said, "You've got Times Square?" And I said, "Yeah." And they go, "Okay, well, we'll give you Trafalgar Square then." So we had kind of our flagship locations, and we were able to build that out. And we ended up staging events on the 7th of December 2019 in 52 cities all over the world, with 60,000 people participating. And as we were drawing closer to this, it was the most stressful thing I've ever undertaken. It was really quite overwhelming. Thought I'd bit off more than I could chew. The kind of certainty that I could manifest my ideas into reality gave way to total self doubt and fear of failure. But kind of trying to overcome that fear of failure was really important. So the lesson for me to draw out from that is it's okay to fail. Don't get bogged down by a fear of failure. But if you're going to put yourself out there, you might as well take a risk and dare greatly, which really what that campaign epitomized. And it was only through pushing through that feeling of overwhelm and stress that we were able to make something happen that really did feel at many points way beyond our reach. So to kind of conclude, my journey, and then I'm happy to answer questions. We'd raised a lot of money from these sleep out events. The global one raised $10 million. and that was distributed to charities all over the world. But for the monies we raised in Scotland, we had a real responsibility for how we would invest that, to try and make the maximum impact in tackling the homeless issue. And ultimately, if you really want to do something about homelessness, you inevitably get into the issue of homes and trying to help put roofs over people's heads. So we ended up launching a couple of big housing initiatives, um, both of which have now helped over 1,000 people off the streets into their own homes, and one of which I'll just highlight is a project called the Social Bite Village. And this is a project where we took on vacant land from Edinburgh Council and we put into production these 2-bedroom prefabricated homes that you can see here. And this is launched in 2018, and so far it's helped 100 people to come to find their feet and ultimately be helped onto their own tenancies. And we're in the process of trying to build 2 more of these villages, one in Dundee, which is going to be focused on addiction recovery, and another one in Greater Glasgow in South Lanarkshire. So that kind of brings me to the end of my talk. The final lesson to draw out is, I'd encourage everyone to sort of define your own success. We can kind of get a bit brainwashed in society that's in the world of business that success equals money and success equals maximizing profits. But there's so much more that businesses can achieve, whether it's making an impact, whether it's creating employment opportunities, whether it's creating new life experiences. So don't be afraid to try and find alignment with what you identify as a person. That's certainly what I feel really fortunate to have done with Social Bite, is found real alignment with who I identified with when I was a young idealistic teenager. It was really politically motivated, to kind of try and align that whilst also being able to be entrepreneurial. It has been a fantastic experience for me. So to encourage everyone to define your own success. And yeah, thanks very much for hearing my story. Hope you enjoy the book, and happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Josh. Wow, there's so many incredible leadership journeys in there. Perhaps I can just move your spotlight so we can see everybody. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. I'm sure lots of inspiration in the room. I don't think we've got you for much longer, but maybe we could do 5 minutes of Q&A. Is that okay with you?
Of course.
I'll read you the questions we've got in the chat, and so I think there's 3 main ones we've got in there at the moment. So, what were the indicators Social Bite that told Social Bite it was time to pivot? Have you been working with other companies on homelessness in Scotland? Like, did you collaborate with others? And then a question on, and perhaps this is one for a follow-up, but funding for companies to help them bring in people from, I guess, with backgrounds that have got barrier to employment. So you're aware of, funding that people here can access. I guess that's a practical one.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
I'll leave you with those 3.
So, I mean, I think that in terms of the pivot thing, I guess for me, I was always really motivated to try and make a difference. That was always an ambition that I had in life. So I think for me, when Pete came and knocked on our door, then it was just an opportunity to think that we can grab that and make an impact with what we're doing. And I think pretty naively, when we offered Pete that job, I thought I was changing his life. But I think the truth is much more so that he was completely changing the course of mine and completely changing the course of our organization and what we would go on to do. So it goes to show you sometimes when you do take an opportunity that it can actually fundamentally change your life and change your organization more so than what you might think. So that's that one. On businesses partnering, absolutely. Like I think Social Bite wouldn't be in existence today if it wasn't for all of the different private sector companies that have rallied around us and supported us in 101 ways. Whether it's the sleep outs, the village is another example, where companies from the construction industry donated services, donated groundworks, donated the windows, the wood, the roofs, the furniture, the paint, pretty much everything that made up that village ended up being contributed by different companies in the construction industry. So that was a really tangible example of kind of private sector organizations contributing their expertise or their product to make something happen for a fantastic impact. And then I think, earlier you mentioned maybe someone from It Is On was maybe on the call. So It Is On is another great example that I'd love to shout
Mhm.
out if there's someone here from It Is On. But every year for the last 8 years, they've ran a deal on their website where the public can buy a homeless person a Christmas dinner for £5. And when we first ran that, we were a tiny little organization. We had two cafes. We decided to open them up on Christmas Day, and we asked It Is On if they would run a deal, buy a homeless person Christmas dinner for £5, and they asked us how many would like to sell, and we said if we could sell maybe 800 dinners for £5, then we could cover the cost of opening these two cafes. And they said that's fine. What happens if you sell more? And I said, well, to be honest, our pay it forward jars are running empty quite a lot, so we're having to turn homeless people away. So maybe we could keep them topped up for a few weeks. They said, okay. So they ran this deal, and we were all watching it launch, and it ended up selling the 800 target dinners in about 10 minutes, and the deal ran for 2 weeks, and it ended up selling 36,000 Christmas dinners. And that totally changed the funding dynamic of Social Bite, where it kept those pay it forward jars effectively topped up for an entire year. And it's an amazing example of charitable and private sector collaboration, and it really has been the lifeblood of our free food service ever since for the last 8 years. So I think collaboration between charity and social enterprise and private business is just absolutely essential. And what was the final one?
And maybe it's something we can provide later, but if you're aware of funding to help companies to do
Funding.
what you did.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. I'm not necessarily sure on the funding point, but Social Bite do it for the last 2 to 3 years have developed a program called Jobs First, which is exactly to do that exact thing. So we work with a range of private sector employers where we support them to open up job chances to homeless people, and then Social Bite provide a dedicated support worker, both to the employer and to the individual, to help make that happen. So yeah, that's been an amazing success, and we've got some of the UK's biggest employers involved in that, and we've seen some amazing success stories of people going into these mainstream businesses and really
Amazing.
thriving. So it's something, if anyone was interested in getting involved in that side of things, I'm sure you can find details of the Jobs First program on our website, and something I'm sure
Yeah.
we'd be keen to explore other partnerships with.
Great. Well, what we'll do, Josh, we'll share your website, your details, so people can find out how to follow you and support you and to bring what you're doing into their businesses. Raise of hands physically, people on this call, if something that Josh has said has inspired you to take some action in your business. Yeah, okay, well, that's what we want to see. That's nice feedback for Josh. Josh, thank you so much. So many more questions we could ask you, but thank you so much for being generous and sharing your time and your lessons with us. Loads for us to take back there. And we'll now go into a bit of reflection in terms of what action these guys will take that put their hands up. So thank you so much. And I
All
hope
right.
to see you again soon.
Thanks,
Thank you so
guys.
much.
See you later.
Yes, we give some love to Josh. Thank you. All right. So as usual, we're running hot on time, but we would really love you to take, before you put you in breakout, a final breakout. We would love you to take, I'm going to say 1 minute. So to give Sophie 1 minute warning, a little bit of quiet reflection time. You've heard a lot today from me, from our panelists, from Josh. Why don't you just make a few notes now, 1 quiet minute, I'll shut up. What are you inspired to look into, to take action on, to ask your peers about, to ask us for tools on? Take 1 minute and then we will whisk you into small breakout rooms so you can just make some commitments to each other. We'll then bring you back for a sort of a next steps and an ending, and we will end at past. So it will be a whistle stop. All right, Sophie, do you want to arrange some breakouts? We'll bring you back at 25 past the hour. So just a few minutes to share your commitments, what your next steps are, what you're inspired by, and we'll bring you back at 25 past for next steps. And hopefully some sharing with us. Thank you. If anyone finds themselves on a breakout on their own, as we've had a few people leaving, come back to us. We can move you somewhere else. Don't sit there lonely. Okay, good.
Mahalo, do you and Jordan tend to go into the breakout room?